The galaxy was finally breathing after decades of conflict. Humanity and the Zevtari, two vastly different species, had clashed for years over resources, territory, and ideologies. On the surface, the humans were outmatched by the Zevtari's superior technology and warrior ethos. But humans had proven to be an unpredictable adversary, using ingenuity, grit, and their ability to adapt to outlast their enemies. The war had drained both civilizations, forcing them to the negotiation table. It was here, in the hallowed halls of the Galactic Accord Council, that the stage was set for an unexpected twist in history. The peace treaty was poised to be a historic moment. Delegates from countless allied species observed as the two representatives, Queen Xyrath Laura of the Zevtari and Commander Elias Carter of humanity, prepared to sign the accord. The Queen, a towering figure adorned in regalia of her warrior caste, exuded an aura of dominance. Her luminescent silver skin reflected the ambient light, and her piercing golden eyes scanned the room, betraying her disdain. She had fought on the front lines of the war, and had little respect for the species that had forced her to this moment. To her, humanity was an annoyance that had somehow evaded extinction through sheer cunning and audacity. On the opposite end of the negotiation table sat Carter, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the Queen's visible tension. He was neither imposing nor flamboyant, but there was a quiet confidence about him that made the other delegates take notice. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. Carter was the human embodiment of diplomacy tempered with strategy. It was under his leadership that humanity had managed to outwit the Zevtari in critical moments, forcing a stalemate. The treaty signing began with the usual formalities, a monotonous recital of terms that underscored the restoration of peace. Xyrath listened impatiently, her claws tapping the polished table and barely restrained frustration. The Council's mediator droned on about resource-sharing agreements, reparations, and demilitarized zones. It was all predictable until they reached the final clause. This was where the real drama began. The mediator paused, his tone shifting as he read the most contentious stipulation. The Zevtari Queen, as a symbolic gesture of peace, would be placed under the guardianship of humanity. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the chamber was silent. Then, a low growl emanated from Xyrath, her eyes narrowing into furious slits. She rose from her seat with the grace of a predator, her voice reverberating with indignation. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice cutting through the silence. "I am no pawn to be handed over to a lesser species. This demand is an affront to my honor and my people's sovereignty." The room tensed. Delegates shifted uncomfortably, and whispers spread like wildfire. The humans had played their hand boldly, and it was clear that this demand had been deliberately placed to assert dominance. Carter, however, remained seated, his gaze locked on Xyrath. His calmness only fueled her rage, and for a moment, it seemed as though the fragile peace would shatter before it even began. He finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Your Majesty, this is not about humiliation. It's about trust. Your people have violated treaties before. Humanity needs assurance that this agreement will not be another empty promise." Xyrath's claws flexed as she considered his words. Her pride and fury battled with the pragmatic understanding that rejecting this clause could reignite the war. Her council, seated behind her, whispered urgently. They knew the cost of defiance. Their resources were depleted, their warriors weary. Reluctantly, Xyrath sat back down, though her anger was palpable. "This insult will not be forgotten," she hissed. "You may force this upon me, but know this, human, I am no one's possession." Carter nodded, his expression unreadable. "The arrangement is not one of possession, Your Majesty. It is a partnership. You will see." The signing proceeded, but the atmosphere was tense. Xyrath's signature on the document marked the first time in Zevtari history that their monarchy had yielded so publicly. It was a moment that would be analyzed and debated for generations to come. For humanity, it was a strategic triumph, a way to ensure that the peace would hold. For Xyrath, it was a bitter pill to swallow, and she vowed to regain her honor and restore her people's pride. As the treaty was finalized, Xyrath couldn't shake the feeling that she had walked into a trap, one far more intricate than any battlefield maneuver. Carter's calculated words and unflinching demeanor unsettled her. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered, those who scrambled and improvised in the heat of battle. He was deliberate, methodical, and unyielding. For the first time, Xyrath felt the weight of what she had agreed to, and it left her with an unfamiliar sensation, unease. The ceremony concluded with formalities, but the real work was just beginning. As Xyrath prepared to leave the council chambers, Carter approached her. He extended his hand, a gesture of human diplomacy. She regarded it with disdain but did not refuse. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her voice low but laced with venom. "You may have won this battle, human, but the war of wills has just begun." Carter's lips twitched in a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. I wouldn't have it any other way." With that, the treaty was sealed, and the galaxy moved into a new chapter. For humanity, it was a step toward securing their place among the stars. For Xyrath, it was the beginning of an ordeal that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her people, and the species she had come to despise. The Queen of the Zevthree was now bound to humanity, and neither side fully understood the consequences of that fateful clause. Queen Xyrath's arrival on Earth was marked by a mixture of curiosity and resentment. The journey from the Galactic Accord Council to the human-controlled facility was brief, but the symbolic distance between her position as a warrior queen and her new role as a diplomatic custodian felt immeasurable. She observed Earth from orbit, her gaze scanning the blue-green planet with a blend of disdain and intrigue. The humans had been careful to ensure her arrival was private, with minimal fanfare. To her, it felt like both an insult and an act of wariness, as if they feared her presence could incite rebellion among their people. In truth, she did not blame them. Humanity had every reason to tread cautiously, but so did she. The facility she was brought to was an impressive structure, carved into the cliffs overlooking a vast ocean. It was more than a prison but less than a palace. It was a space designed for containment without the appearance of captivity. Inside, the architecture was utilitarian, with subtle design choices meant to convey respect and neutrality. The Zevthree Queen, however, saw through it all. To her, it was a cage, albeit a gilded one. Her first interactions with humans in this new environment were strained. The staff, a carefully selected team of scientists, diplomats, and cultural analysts, approached her with cautious professionalism. She responded with icy aloofness, her pride refusing to acknowledge their attempts at cordiality. To her, they were representatives of a species that had forced her into this humiliating position. Despite their polite demeanor, she saw their eyes filled with curiosity, fascination, and most insultingly, pity. She hated it. Her resentment extended to their way of life. The gravity on Earth, though similar to her homeworld, felt subtly off, and the atmosphere carried a strange metallic tang she found unsettling. Human food, with its varied textures and flavors, was an affront to her refined palate. When offered a selection of their cuisine, she refused outright, demanding Zevthree provisions instead. This act of defiance was met with understanding rather than confrontation, which only deepened her irritation. She wanted to provoke them, to see cracks in their controlled facade, but the humans remained maddeningly composed. Despite her resistance, she could not ignore the peculiarities of the species that had brought her here. Humans were remarkably adaptable. Where the Zevthree relied on tradition and rigid hierarchy, humans thrived in chaos, improvising solutions that seemed almost reckless. She observed them quietly, noting their resourcefulness with a growing sense of unease. They were far more complex than she had given them credit for, and this complexity both intrigued and unsettled her. Over time, her interactions with Commander Carter became more frequent. He had made no effort to impose himself upon her initially, allowing her to settle, or, as she saw it, stew in her discontent. When they finally began speaking, their conversations were brief but loaded with subtext. Carter, ever the strategist, knew how to walk the fine line between respect and assertion. His calm demeanor grated on her, especially when he asked pointed questions about her people, their traditions, and their perceptions of humanity. She avoided answering directly, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of understanding her or her culture. Carter, however, was patient. He understood the value of time and the slow erosion of defenses. Unlike her people, who viewed dominance as immediate and forceful, he wielded influence like a sculptor chipping away at stone. She hated the feeling that she was being studied, her reactions catalogued for some grander purpose she couldn't yet discern. Yet she could not deny his intelligence. His questions, though infuriating, forced her to consider perspectives she had dismissed outright before. As the days turned into weeks, Zyrith began to see cracks in her initial perception of humanity. They were not the chaotic, unworthy creatures she had assumed. Their humor, which at first seemed juvenile and irreverent, began to reveal layers of emotional resilience. She overheard human workers sharing jokes even during moments of visible stress, their laughter cutting through tension like a blade. It was a behavior she could not fathom. Among her people, such levity in the face of adversity would be seen as weakness. For humans, it seemed to be a source of strength. Her turning point came during a minor crisis within the facility. A technical malfunction disrupted the climate systems, causing a rapid temperature drop that threatened to damage sensitive equipment. While her instinct was to wait for orders from leadership, a reflection of her own military training, the humans responded immediately, working together in a flurry of chaotic but effective activity. Carter himself coordinated the effort, delegating tasks with precision and calm. Within hours, the problem was resolved, and operations resumed as if nothing had happened. Zyrith found herself unnerved by the display. There was no rigid hierarchy dictating the humans' actions, no reliance on precedent or protocol. Instead, they adapted, relying on trust, communication, and ingenuity. It was a stark contrast to the Zevthari way of solving problems, which often involved calculated but inflexible strategies. She began to wonder if it was this adaptability that had allowed them to survive, and even thrive against her people during the war. Despite her growing respect for their capabilities, Zyrith refused to let her guard down. She still viewed her situation as a power play, a calculated move by humanity to diminish her authority. She resolved to find ways to exploit their weaknesses, to turn their supposed strengths against them. But for every vulnerability she identified, she found an unexpected strength to counter it. Their empathy, for instance, was something she had dismissed as a flaw. Yet she saw how it fostered loyalty and cooperation, traits that even her own people struggled to maintain in times of strife. Carter, aware of her internal conflict, continued to challenge her perceptions. During one of their conversations, he said something that lingered in her mind. "You see us as weak because we don't follow your rules. But strength isn't just about tradition or dominance. It's about surviving when everything seems impossible. That's what we do best." His words angered her, not because they were insulting, but because they held an uncomfortable truth. Humanity's survival was not a fluke or an accident. It was the result of qualities her people had overlooked or dismissed. For the first time, Zyrith felt a sliver of doubt about the superiority of the Zevthari way. Though she remained outwardly defiant, her perspective began to shift in subtle ways. She found herself observing humans more closely, not just as adversaries or captors but as a species with qualities worth understanding. She began asking questions of her own, albeit under the guise of curiosity rather than genuine interest. To her surprise, the humans were open and eager to share, their willingness to teach contrasting sharply with the guarded nature of her people. Zyrith's time on Earth was not a single moment of revelation, but a gradual unraveling of preconceived notions. Each interaction, each observation, chipped away at her resistance, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own biases and assumptions. She did not yet understand humanity fully, nor did she trust them completely. But one thing was certain: they were far more formidable, and far more fascinating, than she had ever imagined. The balance between resentment and respect became more precarious as the days unfolded. For Queen Zyrith, the notion of cooperating with humans remained distasteful, yet she could not deny the growing recognition of their abilities. Humanity's unpredictability continued to both frustrate and fascinate her. What began as a relationship defined by tension was slowly evolving into something more complex. Neither side openly acknowledged the subtle shifts in their dynamic, but they were undeniable. The arrival of an external threat would bring these changes to the forefront, forcing both Xyrath and the humans to confront their perceptions of one another in ways neither had anticipated. The threat came in the form of a rogue Zevtari faction, a splinter group unwilling to accept the peace treaty. They had been a thorn in the side of both governments, sabotaging diplomatic efforts and attacking vulnerable targets in the hopes of reigniting the war. Their latest move was an assault on a human research outpost near Zevtari space, a calculated strike meant to test the fragile alliance between the two species. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving little doubt that it was meant as a message: the war was not over for everyone. News of the attack reached Earth within hours, sparking immediate concern among the human leadership. The incident threatened to unravel the tenuous peace and undo months of painstaking diplomacy. For Xyrath, the situation was both a source of shame and a test of her resolve. The rogue faction's actions reflected poorly on her leadership, undermining her authority and calling into question her ability to control her people. At the same time, it presented an opportunity to prove her commitment to the treaty, and perhaps, to humanity itself. Commander Carter approached her with the matter, his tone neutral but firm. He made it clear that humanity expected her cooperation in addressing the threat. It was a delicate request, as it required Xyrath to take a stand against her own kind. For a leader who had built her identity around loyalty to her people, the decision was not an easy one. Yet she knew that inaction would only confirm humanity's worst fears about the Zevtari. Reluctantly, she agreed to assist. What followed was a rare instance of collaboration between the two species. Xyrath and Carter worked together to devise a plan to neutralize the rogue faction without escalating tensions further. Their discussions were marked by a clash of styles, Xyrath's preference for direct, decisive action often at odds with Carter's methodical, strategic approach. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their shared desire to prevent further bloodshed. The process was not without friction, but it was also a turning point in their relationship. As they strategized, Xyrath began to see Carter in a new light. His calm demeanor, which had once infuriated her, now seemed like a source of strength. He was unflappable in the face of adversity, his focus unwavering even under pressure. She respected his ability to think several steps ahead, a skill she recognized as essential in both war and diplomacy. At the same time, Carter came to appreciate Xyrath's insights into Zevtari tactics and psychology. Her understanding of her people's mindset proved invaluable, offering perspectives that human intelligence could not provide. The operation itself was a test of their growing partnership. Carter relied on Xyrath's knowledge to predict the rogue faction's movements, while Xyrath relied on Carter's ability to coordinate resources and personnel. Together, they orchestrated a counteroffensive that neutralized the threat with minimal casualties. It was a victory achieved not through brute force but through a careful balance of strength and restraint. For Xyrath, it was a humbling experience, one that forced her to acknowledge the value of collaboration, a concept that had long been foreign to her people. In the aftermath of the operation, the dynamic between Xyrath and Carter continued to evolve. Their interactions, once marked by hostility and mistrust, now carried an undercurrent of mutual respect. They began to share more about their respective cultures and experiences, not as adversaries but as equals. Xyrath spoke of her struggles as a leader, the weight of responsibility that came with her position. Carter, in turn, shared his own challenges, offering glimpses into humanity's resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. These conversations were not without tension. Xyrath remained wary of Carter's intentions, and he, in turn, was careful not to overstep. Yet there was a growing sense of understanding between them, a recognition that they were both products of their circumstances. They began to see each other not as symbols of their respective species but as individuals navigating a complex and uncertain world. Xyrath's perspective on humanity continued to shift as she spent more time among them. She observed their capacity for empathy, their ability to find common ground even in the face of profound differences. It was a quality that both puzzled and impressed her. Among the Zevthari, strength was measured in terms of dominance and control. For humans, strength seemed to lie in their ability to adapt, to forge connections, and to find solutions where none seemed possible. At the same time, humanity's flaws became more apparent to her. They were impulsive, prone to infighting and short-sightedness. Yet even these flaws carried a certain charm, a reminder of their imperfect but relentless nature. Zyrith found herself both critical of and drawn to these contradictions, her own beliefs challenged by the complexity of the species she had once dismissed as inferior. For Carter, the experience was equally transformative. He had always seen Zyrith as a formidable opponent, but working alongside her revealed layers of depth he had not anticipated. She was not merely a warrior or a queen, she was a leader burdened by expectations, a figure navigating the delicate balance between tradition and change. Her strength was undeniable, but so too was her vulnerability, a trait that made her all the more human in his eyes. As their bond deepened, both began to grapple with the implications of their newfound understanding. For Zyrith, it meant reevaluating her perception of humanity and her role in the treaty. For Carter, it meant acknowledging the potential for true partnership between their species. Neither could have predicted the path they were on, but both understood that their collaboration had the power to reshape the future. The rogue faction's defeat marked a turning point not just in the treaty's fragile stability, but in the relationship between Zyrith and Carter. What began as an uneasy truce was slowly transforming into something more profound. They were no longer mere representatives of their species. They were individuals learning to navigate a complex and evolving alliance. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, both saw the possibility of a future defined not by conflict but by cooperation. The aftermath of the rogue faction's defeat left ripples that neither humanity nor the Zevthari could ignore. For Queen Zyrith, the events forced a reevaluation of her priorities. She had entered this arrangement with the assumption that it was temporary, a strategic necessity to ensure the survival of her people. Yet, the longer she remained on Earth, the more she realized that her time among humans was not merely an imposition, it was a challenge to her beliefs, her leadership, and her understanding of strength. Zyrith's council, still wary of humanity, had been monitoring her closely. They offered her an opportunity to return, a chance to reclaim her throne and restore the honor that many within the Zevthari believed had been tarnished. On the surface, it was everything she had fought for, a path back to her people and the power that was her birthright. But the decision was not as simple as it once might have been. Her time on Earth had shown her a different way of thinking, one that valued adaptability and cooperation over rigid adherence to tradition. She knew that returning to her old life would mean abandoning the progress she had made, both personally and in fostering a fragile but significant bond with humanity. Commander Carter, ever perceptive, saw the conflict in her eyes. He approached her not as a rival or even as a diplomat, but as someone who had come to respect her. He acknowledged the weight of her choice and made it clear that humanity did not see her as a prisoner or a pawn. "The treaty never meant to take your freedom," he told her, his tone devoid of the strategic edge she had come to expect. "It was a way to build trust, to show that we could coexist without fear." His words struck a chord. Zyrith had always viewed the clause that bound her to humanity as a humiliation, a calculated move to undermine her authority. But now, she saw it in a different light. It was not a question of ownership or dominance, but of partnership. Humanity had taken a risk in demanding her presence, just as she had taken a risk in agreeing to the treaty. Both sides had gambled on the possibility of understanding, and against all odds, they were beginning to succeed. The realization was not an easy one. It forced Zyrith to confront her own pride and the biases that had shaped her worldview. She had always seen strength as a zero-sum game, a contest in which one side must dominate the other. But humanity's strength lay in its contradictions, in its ability to find common ground without sacrificing its identity. It was a lesson that she had resisted for far too long, and now, it was impossible to ignore. Her decision to stay on Earth was not made lightly. She knew it would be seen as a betrayal by some within her people, a further erosion of Zevthari sovereignty. But she also knew that it was the right choice, not just for herself but for the future of both species. By remaining, she could act as a bridge, a living symbol of what could be achieved when two vastly different cultures found a way to work together. Her role began to evolve. No longer merely a figurehead, she became an active participant in the alliance between humanity and the Zevtari. She advised on matters of diplomacy, offering insights into her people's culture and traditions that helped to ease tensions and foster mutual respect. At the same time, she learned from humanity, adopting their methods of negotiation and problem-solving to address challenges that once seemed insurmountable. For Carter, Xyritha's decision was a vindication of his approach. He had always believed that true strength lay not in forcing compliance but in earning trust. Her willingness to remain and contribute to the alliance validated his faith in humanity's ability to rise above its limitations. Their partnership, once fraught with animosity, had become a cornerstone of the peace effort, a testament to what could be achieved when individuals set aside their differences for the greater good. The broader implications of their collaboration were profound. Humanity and the Zevtari, once bitter enemies, began to see each other not as threats but as potential allies. Joint initiatives in science, exploration, and defense became the foundation of a new era, one defined by cooperation rather than conflict. There were still challenges, of course. Mistrust and prejudice lingered on both sides, and progress was often slow. But the presence of Xyrith and Carter as symbols of unity provided a powerful counterbalance to the forces of division. Xyritha's transformation did not go unnoticed among her people. While some viewed her continued presence on Earth as a betrayal, others began to see it as a strategic advantage. Her reports to the Zevtari Council highlighted the benefits of collaboration, and over time, she began to sway even her harshest critics. The Zevtari were a proud and unyielding race, but Xyritha's leadership demonstrated that strength could take many forms. By embracing the lessons she had learned from humanity, she showed her people that adaptability and cooperation were not signs of weakness but of wisdom. For Xyritha herself, the experience was deeply personal. She had arrived on Earth as a conqueror in chains, determined to resist any attempt to subjugate her. But the humans had not tried to break her, they had challenged her to grow. In doing so, they had earned her respect, and, in a way, her loyalty. She would always be Zevtari, bound by the traditions and values of her people. But she was also something more, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what could be achieved when pride was set aside in favor of understanding. Her relationship with Carter, though still marked by the occasional clash of personalities, had evolved into a genuine friendship. They had come to see each other not just as representatives of their species, but as individuals who shared a common goal. Their bond, forged through hardship and mutual respect, became a microcosm of the alliance they had worked so hard to build. Together, they proved that even the most entrenched divisions could be overcome with patience, determination, and a willingness to see the world through another's eyes. As the years passed, Xyritha's presence on Earth came to be seen not as a symbol of defeat, but as a testament to the power of reconciliation. Her journey from defiance to cooperation inspired others on both sides, offering a blueprint for how even the deepest wounds could be healed. The treaty that had once seemed like a bitter compromise became the foundation of a new era, one in which humanity and the Zevtari worked together to face the challenges of an ever-changing galaxy. In the end, Xyritha's legacy was not defined by the war she had fought or the humiliation she had endured, but by the bridges she had built. She had come to Earth as a queen, determined to assert her dominance. She remained as a leader, determined to ensure that the peace she had helped to forge would endure for generations to come. It was a journey she had never anticipated, but one that had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. And in that transformation, both humanity and the Zevtari found the strength to move forward, united by the lessons they had learned from each other.